For countless centuries, the Creel Empire had ruled the stars. Their banners hung over hundreds of conquered worlds, and their warships filled the skies wherever they went. To the Creel, fear was a word without meaning. They had faced many enemies, but all had fallen. Some had tried to resist, but their efforts had only lasted a short while before being crushed under the might of the empire. Others had chosen to surrender without a fight, believing it was better to serve than to die. Either way, the result was always the same. The Creel grew stronger and prouder with every victory. Their warriors marched in perfect order, tall and armored, their weapons forged with technologies far beyond the reach of weaker races. When they landed on a world, resistance crumbled. When they set their fleets in motion, whole planets trembled. It was said among the conquered that the Creel had never known fear, and perhaps they never would. To their leaders, the galaxy was nothing more than a field waiting to be harvested. On the Creel homeworld, the High Command gathered inside a vast hall of steel and fire. A council of warlords stood before maps of the galaxy, each marked with red to show the territories they had taken. Yet even with so much already under their control, their hunger was never satisfied. They spoke of new stars, new worlds, and new victories that would make their empire eternal. One of the warlords raised his hand, showing a new report. The scouts had found a world circling a yellow sun. The planet was rich with oceans, mountains, forests, and life. Its people were a young species who called themselves humans. The warlord laughed as he read the description. To the Creel, humans were nothing special. They had no great fleets, no ancient weapons, and no powerful allies. They lived divided into nations, sometimes even fighting among themselves. Such weakness only made the Creel sneer with contempt. This world will fall quickly, the warlord declared. Its people will serve as workers in our mines and factories. Its resources will fuel our fleets. It will not take long. The others nodded in agreement. To them, it was already decided. No council member imagined that humans could be different from all the others they had conquered. No one thought there would be any challenge at all. But beyond their arrogance, small details were missed. The reports mentioned that humans were strangely adaptable. They had spread across every corner of their planet, surviving in ice, deserts, forests, and seas. They created tools from anything they found and turned even simple objects into weapons when they needed to fight. The Creel dismissed this as nothing important. To them, it was just the natural struggle of a primitive world. The fleets were prepared. Thousands of warships were called from distant campaigns to join the great march toward Earth. The Creel soldiers sang their battle songs, their voices shaking the halls of steel. To them, this was not a war, but a hunt. They looked forward to showing another species what it meant to face the Empire. Far away, on the little blue planet, humans lived unaware of what was coming. They worked in their cities, sailed their ships, and dreamed of their own future among the stars. Some had already begun exploring space, but their steps were small compared to the great leaps of the Creel. No human could imagine that across the stars, a mighty empire was already planning their conquest. As the Creel fleets rose from their docks and set their course, the warlords smiled with pride. They believed this would be another swift victory, another mark of power to add to their long history. None of them felt even the smallest doubt. None of them thought of failure. For the Creel had never known defeat, and nothing in the universe had ever made them afraid. What they did not know was that this time, things would be different. This time, they were not marching toward another easy conquest. This time, they were marching toward a people who would not bow, who would not break, and who would teach the Empire something they had never learned before. The Creel were going to learn the meaning of fear, and it would begin with the humans of Earth. The day the Creel arrived in Earth's skies began like any other. People went to their work, children walked to schools, and cities moved with their usual rhythm. Then the shadows appeared. At first, they were only dark spots above the clouds, but as they grew larger, fear spread across the streets. The world had seen planes and rockets before, but nothing like this. Towering shapes of metal hung in the sky, so massive that they blocked out the sun in places. The Creel ships were enormous. Their black surfaces gleamed as if made from stone and fire. They moved without sound, and yet their very presence made the ground shake. People gathered in crowds, pointing upward. Some thought it was a new human invention, a secret project finally revealed. Others whispered that it was not human at all. The truth came swiftly when voices echoed from the skies, translated into every language of Earth. The message was cold and clear. The Creel declared themselves rulers of the stars. They told humanity to surrender, to accept their rule, or be destroyed. Their words carried no doubt, no hesitation. It was not a question. It was a command. On Earth, leaders rushed to speak. Governments held emergency meetings. Scientists tried to study the strange signals. Militaries scrambled jets and raised defenses, though many wondered if it would matter against such power. Ordinary people watched with wide eyes, waiting to see if the world would end before the day was over. The Creel waited, calm and certain. They had made such announcements on many worlds before. Always, the response was the same: fear, surrender, or hopeless resistance that ended quickly. They believed humans would act no differently. But the first answer they received surprised them. Instead of kneeling, humans sent back a message that carried no fear. "This is our world," it said. "We will not surrender." The Creel commanders laughed. To them, it was foolish pride. Yet soon after, their fleets moved closer, testing Earth's defenses. The first strike was simple: a small Creel ship descended toward a coastal city to show strength. But as it approached, human fighter planes rose from the airfields below. The fighters were smaller, slower, and far weaker than the alien craft, but they did not hesitate. They attacked with everything they had. The battle lasted minutes. The Creel ship destroyed many planes, but then, against all expectation, it fell. A missile, guided by a pilot who gave everything, struck the alien vessel at its weakest point. Flames tore across its hull, and the ship crashed into the sea. The world cheered. For the first time, people saw that the invaders could bleed. The Creel, however, were stunned. Never before had a primitive world destroyed even a single ship so quickly. Their commanders grew irritated, but also curious. What made these humans so bold? Why did they not retreat when faced with certain death? On Earth, the news spread like fire. People who had been ready to hide now stood taller. Soldiers prepared their weapons with new determination. Engineers began thinking of ways to turn their machines into defenses. Ordinary men and women whispered to each other that if one ship could fall, perhaps more could too. The Creel did not retreat. Instead, they grew more aggressive. More ships appeared in the skies. They struck at military bases, power grids, and cities. Their weapons cut through human defenses with frightening ease. Yet each time they struck, humans fought back. Tanks fired on machines far larger than themselves. Soldiers used courage when technology failed them. Civilians carried supplies and built shelters in record time. Humanity refused to act like the broken slaves the Creel expected. The Empire began to see something new. The humans did not simply fight with weapons. They fought with ideas. They adapted. When one defense failed, they built another. When they lost, they learned. No other species had done this with such speed. The Creel had crushed many worlds before, but never had they faced such resilience from the very beginning. As battles spread across the globe, a pattern formed. The Creel would attack, and humans would suffer heavy losses, but always, somewhere, they struck back. A ship would fall. A squad of alien soldiers would be defeated. And each victory, however small, gave humanity greater strength. The Creel commanders began to feel a strange sensation in their chest, something they had never known before. They did not call it fear yet. They only called it annoyance, confusion, or anger. But deep inside, the first spark of unease was growing. On Earth, leaders gathered their people. They told them the truth that the enemy was stronger, but not unstoppable. Every person was called to defend the planet in some way, whether through battle, invention, or support. Humanity stood together as one for the first time in its history. The Creel had expected to see despair. Instead, they had awakened unity. And in that unity, a storm was beginning to rise. The war between Earth and the Creel grew heavier with each passing day. Cities burned, skies filled with fire, and oceans shook with falling wreckage. The Creel believed the humans would eventually break, but instead, they became stronger. Among the many who stood up during those dark days was a man named Daniel. He was not a soldier, not a commander, but an engineer who worked with machines and designs. He had never held a weapon before the invasion, but when the Creel attacked his city, he refused to stand aside. Daniel watched how the alien soldiers moved, how their ships landed, and how their weapons worked. While others saw fearsome machines, he saw weak points. Where the Creel thought themselves perfect, Daniel saw flaws. He began to sketch ideas on scraps of paper, ways to trap the invaders in the narrow streets, ways to turn simple machines into weapons. He believed that if humans could not match the Creel with strength, they would match them with creativity. At first, few listened. Military leaders were focused on holding ground and keeping cities from falling. But Daniel's plans were simple, clear, and clever. He showed them how to use collapsed buildings as traps, how to set fire to fuel tanks at the right moment, and how to create diversions that would confuse even advanced alien scanners. Desperate for any advantage, the soldiers began to try his ideas. The results surprised everyone. In one city, a group of Creel soldiers marched confidently through the streets, only to find themselves caught in an ambush triggered by hidden explosives Daniel had designed using ordinary factory equipment. In another place, alien machines were forced into narrow alleys where they became easy targets for human rockets. Each time Daniel's strategies were used, the humans gained victories where none had been expected. Word of these victories spread quickly. Daniel, the engineer who had once only built bridges and machines, became a symbol of human ingenuity. Soldiers trusted his plans. Civilians whispered his name with hope. For the first time, people believed the invaders could be defeated, not only in single battles but in the greater war. The Creel, however, were angered by these surprises. They sent more troops, stronger weapons, and new machines to crush resistance. Yet each time, Daniel studied them, learned from them, and found a way to strike back. He saw that the Creel always relied on fear to win. They expected enemies to panic, but humans did the opposite. The more the Empire pressed, the more humans adapted. One night, Daniel stood on a ruined rooftop, watching alien ships circle above. He knew they were searching for him. The Creel had marked him as a threat, a leader of resistance. But instead of hiding, Daniel felt only determination. He whispered to the soldiers beside him, "They think we are weak. They think we will break. But every day we fight, we show them they are wrong." The next morning, the Creel launched an assault on a major human base, believing they would finally silence resistance. Their ships darkened the sky, and their weapons rained fire on the ground. Yet Daniel had prepared. He had turned the base into a fortress of traps. Hidden tunnels carried soldiers safely from place to place. Explosives placed in abandoned vehicles exploded at the perfect moment, cutting through enemy lines. Towers that looked broken were secretly armed with rockets. The battle raged for hours. Human losses were heavy, but the Creel suffered something they had never known before: confusion. They were not facing a scattered resistance, but a coordinated defense built by human hands and human minds. When night finally fell, the Creel were forced to retreat. For the first time, an entire wave of their attack had failed. The victory was small compared to the vast power of the empire, but it meant everything to humanity. Around the world, people heard of the battle and cheered. They learned that humans could stand against the mightiest force in the galaxy. They learned that courage and clever thinking could strike even the strongest enemy. In the Creel High Command, silence filled the halls. Reports spoke of heavy losses, of soldiers lost in traps, of machines destroyed by primitive weapons. The warlords, who once laughed at the idea of human resistance, now began to feel restless. They did not yet admit it, but something cold stirred in their hearts. They had never seen such stubbornness, such creativity, such refusal to bow. Daniel, standing with tired soldiers at dawn, looked at the smoking wreckage of alien machines. He knew the war was far from over. Earth was still burning, and the Creel still had far greater power. But he also knew something else. Humanity had shown that it would not break. Humanity had shown that it could fight back. The Creel believed nothing in the universe could make them afraid. But now, without even realizing it, they had taken their first step toward fear. And the face of that fear was human. The Creel Empire had grown tired of small battles on Earth. Again and again, their fleets struck, and again humans refused to bow. It was an insult to the warlords, an insult that could not be ignored. So they decided to unleash their full strength. A command was given from the High Council itself: Earth's strongest defense base must be crushed, and its people shown what happened to those who resisted the Empire. The target was a vast human base hidden among mountains. It was said to be Earth's last strong shield, where scientists, engineers, and soldiers work side by side. The Creel believed that by destroying this fortress, they would break human spirit forever. The invasion fleet arrived with fire in the skies. Hundreds of alien ships descended like storms, their weapons burning trails of light across the clouds. The sound of their engines shook the mountains. On the ground, soldiers prepared themselves. Among them was Daniel, who had helped design the base's defenses. He stood with commanders as alarms rang, his eyes fixed on the skies. Unlike other battles, this time humanity was ready. Every wall of the base was reinforced with hidden traps. Every road was lined with obstacles. Weapons stolen from the Creel had been studied and turned against them. Daniel had spent nights without sleep, preparing strategies for this very day. He knew the Creel were stronger, but he also knew they trusted their power too much. That pride would be their weakness. The first wave struck with fury. Creel ships bombarded the mountain slopes, sending rocks and fire rolling down. Soldiers scattered into underground tunnels while cannons hidden in cliffs opened fire. Explosions lit the skies as human rockets met alien shields. One by one, alien ships fell, crashing into the valleys below. But the Creel did not stop. They poured more soldiers from the skies, armored warriors who marched without fear. Their weapons burned through walls, their machines cut through steel. The ground shook under their advance. Many humans fell, yet the defense held. Daniel had planned ambush after ambush, and the invaders walked straight into them. In one narrow pass, Creel machines advanced in long lines, confident of victory. At Daniel's signal, charges buried under the rocks exploded, crushing the machines under falling stone. In another place, soldiers lured alien troops into what looked like an abandoned tunnel, only for the tunnel to collapse, burying them alive. Everywhere the Creel expected weakness, they found resistance. The battle turned into chaos. Flames lit the sky, and smoke covered the mountains. The Creel commanders grew furious. Never had they suffered such resistance from what they still called a primitive world. To prove their power, they ordered their flagship to join the fight. The flagship was massive, a dark fortress that blotted out the stars as it descended. Its weapons could tear apart entire cities. The Creel believed that the sight of it alone would shatter human courage. But when its fire struck the mountains, the humans did not flee. Instead, they launched their boldest strike yet. Daniel and his team had studied the flagship for weeks, searching for even the smallest weakness. They discovered that its shield systems needed constant power from a central core. If that core could be disrupted, even for a moment, the ship would be vulnerable. The chance was slim, but it was all they had. As the flagship fired upon the base, a group of human pilots flew into the storm. Their jets were fragile compared to the alien craft, but they darted through the skies with fearless determination. Missiles streaked upward, targeting the hidden core. Alien defenses tore many of the jets from the sky, yet still the humans pressed forward. One pilot, wounded but unbroken, guided his damaged jet straight into the weak point. With a final burst of fire, the jet struck the core. The skies exploded in light. The flagship trembled, its shield collapsing for the first time in centuries. Human rockets and cannons fired together, striking the exposed vessel. Flames spread across its surface. The proud ship of the Creel, their symbol of power, fell from the sky and crashed into the mountains with a thunderous roar. The world shook with the impact. For a moment, silence filled the battlefield. Then cheers erupted from the human defenders. They had done the impossible, they had brought down the heart of the Creel fleet. But the cost was great. Thousands of soldiers lay fallen, and the base itself was in ruins. Families mourned their loved ones, and the mountains were scarred forever. Victory had not come without pain. For the Creel, the loss was unthinkable. Never in their history had their flagship fallen to an enemy, least of all to a young species they had once mocked. Across their empire, whispers began to spread. If the humans could destroy even the greatest ship of the Creel, perhaps the empire was not as invincible as it claimed. In the High Council, warlords argued in anger and disbelief. Some demanded greater force. Others warned that the humans were more dangerous than they seemed. For the first time, the empire's leaders felt the shadow of doubt. And in the mountains of Earth, Daniel stood among the ruins. He looked at the fallen flagship, smoke rising into the dawn. He felt sorrow for the lives lost, but also pride. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would not break. The Creel had wanted to crush human spirit, but instead, they had strengthened it. The fearless empire had suffered its first great wound, and the echo of that loss would shake the stars. The fall of the Creel flagship changed everything. For centuries, the empire had ruled with the belief that their power could not be challenged. Now their strongest ship lay broken in the mountains of Earth. The Creel called it an accident, a mistake, but deep inside their commanders felt something they had never known before. Doubt. For the humans, the battle was more than a victory. It was proof that the invaders could be defeated. Across the world, people rose with new strength. Scientists studied the wreckage of the fallen flagship, engineers pulled apart its broken machines, and soldiers learned the patterns of its weapons. What had once seemed untouchable was now within reach. Humanity had been given a chance, and they would not waste it. Daniel walked through the wreckage with a team of engineers and soldiers. Together, they studied the strange metal and the shattered circuits. Much of the technology was beyond their understanding, but piece by piece, they began to learn. Weapons were rebuilt, ships were modified, and even energy shields were tested. For the first time, humans were not only defending. They were preparing to strike back. Months passed, and the world changed. Factories no longer built only cars or machines for peace. Now they built weapons, armor, and ships for war. Every nation, once divided by borders, worked as one. Plans were shared, resources exchanged, and new fleets rose into the skies. Humanity was no longer hiding. Humanity was building. The first human fleet to leave Earth was small compared to the Empire's armadas, yet it carried something stronger than numbers. It carried determination. Daniel stood among the engineers who had helped prepare it. He knew every bolt, every engine, and every weapon. These ships were not perfect. They were not polished like the sleek vessels of the Creel. But they were fast, clever, and designed with the hands of people who refused to surrender. Their mission was clear: strike at the Creel supply lines. The Empire relied on vast chains of ships to carry fuel, weapons, and soldiers across the stars. If those chains were cut, the Empire would bleed. The fleet launched under the cover of darkness. Engines roared as the ships rose from Earth's atmosphere, breaking into the black sea of space. Soldiers and pilots stared at the stars, knowing that for the first time, they were carrying the war into the enemy's domain. The first raid came at a Creel convoy moving between distant outposts. The alien ships were larger and heavily armed, but they did not expect an attack from humans so far beyond Earth. When the human fleet emerged from the void, the Creel hesitated. That moment was enough. Rockets and energy blasts lit up the darkness, striking transports and escorts. Human ships darted between the giants like wolves among lumbering beasts. Daniel's designs once again proved their worth. Small ships carried hidden weapons that tore through weak points in the alien armor. Others dropped mines that trapped enemy vessels in explosions. In minutes, the convoy was shattered, its supplies destroyed. Humanity had struck the Creel in a place they thought safe. News of the raid spread quickly. Across the galaxy, enslaved species whispered with wonder. For generations, no one had dared fight the Empire in open space. Now humans had done it. Some secretly began to hope, while others prepared to rise. The Creel, furious at their losses, sent more fleets to hunt the human raiders. Yet every time, the humans struck and vanished. They appeared in one sector, destroyed a supply line, then disappeared into the stars. No amount of power could pin them down. The Empire's soldiers began to grow restless. They had always marched forward with certainty, but now they looked over their shoulders. For Daniel, the victories were both inspiring and heavy. Each raid brought triumph, but also loss. Human ships were destroyed, and brave pilots gave their lives. At night, he thought of their faces and wondered how many more would fall before the war was won. Yet he also knew there was no turning back. Every sacrifice carried humanity closer to freedom. Back on Earth, crowds cheered as returning fleets landed. Children painted the names of heroes on walls, and families gathered around radios to hear stories of battles among the stars. The war was still fierce, but for the first time, hope shone brighter than fear. The Creel Empire, once so proud, began to feel cracks in its armor. Its fleets were stretched thinner, its supply lines less secure. Warlords argued with each other, blaming commanders for the failures. The more they tried to crush humanity, the more resistance spread across the galaxy. In a secret meeting, Daniel stood before world leaders and commanders. He placed his hand on a map of the stars. "We can no longer fight only for survival," he said. "We must fight for victory. If we keep striking, if we keep showing the Creel that we will never bow, then others will rise with us. This is no longer just Earth's war. This is the galaxy's war." And with those words, the path forward was clear. Humanity, once the hunted, had become the hunter. The fearless empire that had ruled for centuries was now bleeding under the hands of those it had once called weak. The age of conquest was turning into the age of resistance. And at the heart of it stood humanity, ready to strike again. The Creel Empire, once unstoppable, now faced a threat it had never anticipated. Humanity had gone from defending its home to striking deep into the stars. The fall of supply convoys and the destruction of their fleets had shaken the Empire's confidence. Warlords whispered of rebellion and weakness. For the first time, they feared not a single human ship, but the idea that this young species could inspire others to rise against them. Across the galaxy, enslaved species watched and listened. Many had lived under the Empire's rule for centuries, their worlds drained of resources and their people forced into servitude. Now they saw humans, small in number but bold in action, daring to attack Creel ships, to destroy their machines, and to defy the Empire without fear. A spark of hope lit in their hearts. Perhaps the Creel were not invincible after all. On Earth, Daniel worked with engineers and military leaders. He studied every battle, every Creel strategy, and every technology humans had captured. His mind raced with ideas to strengthen fleets, build new ships, and plan attacks that could disrupt the Empire even further. Humanity had learned to defend itself, and now it was learning to dominate. The first signs of rebellion appeared on distant planets. Communities that had long suffered under the Creel began to rise, attacking supply depots and freeing prisoners. Small groups of rebels, armed with what humans shared and inspired by their courage, struck with precision. The Creel responded with force, but their armies were spread thin. Every attack by humans encouraged another world to rise. In one star system, Daniel led a fleet of human ships against a heavily fortified Creel base. The base was built on a volcanic planet, surrounded by lava rivers and mountains. The Creel thought it was unreachable, thinking humans would never dare approach. But Daniel's strategy was clever. Using stolen Creel schematics, his fleet navigated secret passages through the planet's volcanic tunnels. They emerged close to the heart of the base, unseen and ready to strike. The battle was fierce. Creel soldiers fought with precision, but they were unprepared for humans who knew the terrain and understood their own weapons better than the aliens could anticipate. Missiles struck critical points, traps exploded at the perfect moment, and human fighters darted through the sky like shadows. By the end of the day, the base was destroyed, and human ships returned to Earth with valuable supplies and captured technology. Every success emboldened humanity further. The humans now coordinated attacks across multiple star systems. Fleets moved together, sharing intelligence and resources. They struck where the Creel least expected, forcing them to defend every world they controlled. Communication lines were cut, supply routes destroyed, and colonies once thought safe were now under constant threat. The Creel began to panic. Their warlords argued endlessly in the High Council. Some called for total war, for fleets to crush humanity once and for all. Others warned that every strike only spread resistance further. No solution seemed perfect, no attack guaranteed victory. Fear began to creep into the hearts of those who had never known it before. The empire that had faced every enemy without hesitation now trembled at the thought of human determination. Daniel watched the growing unease among the Creel with quiet satisfaction. He knew the humans had become more than a fighting force. They were a symbol of hope for the galaxy, a living reminder that even the most powerful empire could be challenged. With every victory, more species joined the fight, swelling the ranks of resistance. On Earth, celebrations were modest but heartfelt. Each new victory was a step closer to ending the Creel threat. Citizens worked day and night to support the fleets, to repair ships, and to train new pilots. Scientists raced to understand Creel technology, turning once mysterious machines into tools for humanity's growing strength. The planet had transformed from a world under threat into the center of a galactic resistance movement. Meanwhile, the Creel struggled to respond. They sent massive fleets to suppress uprisings, but each campaign left another planet vulnerable. Leaders found themselves trapped between defending their empire and punishing a species that refused to yield. The more they tried to hold, the more the empire showed cracks. For the first time in history, fear became real for the Creel. They had faced countless enemies and never wavered. But humans were different. Their courage, adaptability, and determination had shaken the empire to its core. The galaxy, long silent under Creel rule, was waking. The once unbreakable empire trembled, unsure of how to regain control. And on Earth, Daniel prepared for the next strike. He looked at the map of the stars and saw endless possibilities. Every Creel world, every fleet, every supply line was a chance to weaken the empire further. Humanity was no longer running from the enemy. Humanity was leading the charge. The galaxy watched as the fearless empire, the Creel, learned what it meant to fear. Humanity had become the spark that could ignite a revolution, and the stars themselves seemed to lean toward the side of the bold, determined, and unyielding. The final battle came above the Creel homeworld, the heart of their empire. For centuries, this planet had been untouchable, a symbol of power that no enemy could challenge. Yet now, human fleets, strengthened by months of victories and allied alien rebels, approached its skies. The Creel were ready, their defenses unmatched in scale and strength. But even the most powerful walls could not stop a determined species that had nothing to lose. Daniel stood on the bridge of the flagship leading the human fleet. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind raced with strategy. Every ship, every fighter, every missile had a role. Months of preparation had led to this moment. Humanity was no longer just defending its home. Humanity was delivering the final strike to the empire that had once seemed untouchable. The battle began with a roar. Creel warships surged into the void, their weapons igniting the darkness. Missiles lit the sky and lasers cut through space. Human ships weaved through the onslaught, small and fast, striking weak points in the alien formations. Every strike counted. Every decision could change the outcome. The Creel were shocked. Despite their superior numbers and firepower, humans moved with coordination, courage, and clever tactics. Ships that seemed fragile against alien weapons survived against impossible odds. Leaders on both sides realized this was no ordinary battle. This was the culmination of a war that had shaken the stars. All across the battlefield, humans and allied rebels pressed forward. Alien planets once loyal to the Creel sent their own forces to join the fight. The Empire, so long feared across the galaxy, was under attack from every side. Panic began to spread among the Creel soldiers. Orders were shouted, yet execution faltered. The invincible Empire found itself uncertain, unprepared for the cunning and determination of humans. Daniel led the charge against the flagship of the Creel High Command. The enormous ship loomed above the planet like a black mountain, shields glowing with energy. The humans had studied it for weeks, identifying weaknesses that the Creel believed were impossible to exploit. Now, every plan came together. Fighters distracted the defenses while missiles, guided with precision, struck at the core. Explosions rocked the flagship. Fires spread across its hull. Creel soldiers fought fiercely, but even their skill could not stop the human assault. The ship shuddered and faltered, its shield failing for the first time in history. Daniel's fleet seized the moment, pressing forward with unrelenting force. On the surface of the planet, the Creel population watched the battle unfold. For generations, they had been told they were untouchable. Their leaders had promised that no enemy could ever threaten them. Now, their greatest warship lay broken in orbit, and the once feared empire trembled before the courage of a young species. Fear spread like fire through the command centers. Never before had the Creel seen such boldness from any species. The flagship finally broke apart in a massive explosion. Pieces of it fell into the planet's atmosphere, burning like meteors across the sky. Humanity's fleets cheered, though the cost had been great. Ships were lost, pilots were gone, and sacrifices had been made. Yet the victory was undeniable. The symbol of Creel power had fallen, and the Empire's invincibility was shattered. With the flagship destroyed, resistance spread across Creel worlds. Freed slaves and allied species rose against their oppressors. The galaxy remembered that even the mightiest empire could be challenged. Daniel and his fleet continued to press the attack, securing peace on planets once enslaved and turning former Creel strongholds into safe havens for those who had suffered under tyranny. The Creel High Council finally admitted the truth they had long denied. Humanity had shown them something no other species had. Humans had courage that would not bend, intelligence that could overcome force, and a unity that inspired others to rise. For the first time, the Empire's leaders understood fear. It was no longer a concept for weak species. It had a face, and that face was human. Daniel looked at the stars, now filled with ships of many worlds united against oppression. The war had ended, but the legacy of humanity would continue. The galaxy would remember the courage, the sacrifice, and the determination of a species that refused to bow. The Creel, once fearless, had learned that no empire, no matter how powerful, could dominate without respect for the courage of those it sought to control. From that day forward, the galaxy knew that humans were a force that could never be underestimated. The birth of fear had begun, and it had a human face.